Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that usually made me feel energized and ready to tackle whatever challenges the week might bring. Instead, I sat in my car outside the offices of Martinez Marketing Solutions, watching my employees filter through the glass doors of the building I'd purchased 3 years ago, when the business had finally grown large enough to need its own space. The red brick facade looked exactly the same as it had on Friday afternoon, but everything else had changed completely. I'd spent the weekend in a state of controlled investigation, reviewing every interaction I could remember having with Jessica Walsh since the day she'd walked into my office, for what I'd thought was a routine job interview. The more I analyzed our professional relationship through the lens of what I now knew, the more obvious the manipulation became. Jessica hadn't just been a good employee who happened to be dating my ex-husband. She'd been a corporate spy, gathering intelligence with the kind of systematic precision that suggested extensive planning and coordination. The laptop bag slung over my shoulder contained printouts of every email Jessica had sent or received through the company system, every file she'd accessed, every client meeting she'd attended. I'd spent Sunday afternoon in my home office going through 18 months of digital records with the thoroughness of a forensic accountant, and what I'd discovered was both more and less than I'd expected. More, because the scope of information Jessica had gathered was staggering. She'd had access to client contracts, financial projections, proprietary marketing strategies, competitive analyses, and detailed breakdowns of which accounts were most profitable and why. She knew which clients were considering leaving, which ones were expanding their budgets, which ones had expressed dissatisfaction with our services. She knew everything about how I'd built my business from a one-woman operation into a thriving consultancy that competed successfully with firms 3 times our size. Less, because there was no evidence that she'd actually stolen anything yet. No copied files sent to external email addresses, no confidential documents forwarded to unauthorized recipients, no obvious attempts to sabotage client relationships or undermine company operations. If Jessica was planning to use the information she'd gathered, she was being very careful about it, which made her infinitely more dangerous than a simple industrial spy would have been. I sat in my car for another 10 minutes, watching Jessica's silver Honda pull into the parking lot exactly 7 minutes late, the way she'd been every Monday morning for the past year. She always blamed traffic on Route 35, always arrived with a large coffee from the Starbucks near her apartment, always seemed slightly flustered in the way that suggested she'd overslept, despite setting multiple alarms. I'd found her minor punctuality issues endearing, a humanizing flaw that made her seem more relatable despite her obvious intelligence and ambition. Now I realized that even her lateness had probably been calculated, a small imperfection designed to make her seem more genuine and less threatening. Everything about Jessica Walsh was performance art, carefully crafted to achieve specific goals that I was only beginning to understand. She was wearing a navy blazer over dark jeans, her hair pulled back in the kind of casual ponytail that looked effortless but probably took 20 minutes to achieve. From a distance, she looked exactly like the competent, dedicated employee I'd trusted with increasingly important responsibilities. But now I knew better. Now I could see the calculation behind every gesture, the careful consideration that went into every choice, from her clothing to her posture to the expression on her face. I waited until she'd disappeared through the building's front entrance before getting out of my own car. The lobby of our building was shared with 2 other small businesses, a financial planning firm and a graphic design studio, but Martinez Marketing Solutions occupied the entire 2nd floor. I'd been proud of that expansion when we'd moved in. Proud of the conference rooms with their views of downtown, proud of the open workspace that encouraged collaboration while still providing privacy when needed. Now the space felt contaminated, every surface potentially touched by someone who'd been lying to me for 18 months. The elevator ride to the 2nd floor felt longer than usual. When the doors opened, I could hear the familiar sounds of Monday morning startup. Computers booting up, coffee makers gurgling to life, the low hum of conversation as my team prepared for another week of client work. It was a routine I'd participated in hundreds of times, but today I felt like an actor who'd forgotten her lines. My office was at the far end of the hall, a corner space with windows overlooking the parking lot and a door that I usually kept open to encourage communication with my staff. This morning I closed it immediately after entering and activated the white noise machine I used for confidential client calls. Whatever happened over the next few days, I needed to control the flow of information very carefully. The first thing I did was change all my computer passwords. Every system, every client database, every financial platform. Jessica had never had my login credentials, but I wasn't taking any chances. Then I called our IT consultant, a taciturn man named Gary, who handled network security for several small businesses in the area. "I need a complete audit of our system access logs," I told him without preamble. "Every file that's been opened, every email that's been sent, every database query that's been run. I want to know exactly who has accessed what information over the past 18 months. Gary's silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had been dropped. Finally, he cleared his throat in the way that suggested he was about to ask a question he didn't really want the answer to. "Are we talking about a security breach?" he asked carefully. "Because if someone has been accessing confidential information without authorization, we might need to involve law enforcement." "Not yet," I said, though the possibility wasn't off the table. "This is purely internal right now. How quickly can you run the audit?" "Depends on how detailed you want it. Basic access logs, maybe 24 hours. Deep forensic analysis with file-level tracking and email metadata, probably 3 to 4 days." "Deep forensic analysis," I said without hesitation. "And Gary? This stays between us for now. Nobody else needs to know we're running this audit." After I hung up, I sat back in my leather desk chair and stared out the window at the parking lot below. Jessica's Honda was visible from this angle, parked in the same spot she'd been using for over a year. Soon I would know exactly what she'd been doing with the access I'd granted her, exactly what information she'd gathered, exactly what she and David were planning to do with their extensive knowledge of my business operations. But first, I needed to understand the bigger picture. Why had they targeted me specifically? What did they hope to gain? And most importantly, how long had they been planning this elaborate deception? I opened my laptop and navigated to the folder where I kept employment records for all current and former staff members. Jessica's file was surprisingly thin considering how important she'd become to our operations. Her resume showed a straightforward progression from college to MBA to consulting work, exactly the kind of background I looked for when hiring junior staff. Her references had been impeccable, including a glowing recommendation from her previous supervisor at a prestigious Chicago firm. On impulse, I decided to call that supervisor and verify Jessica's employment history. It was a routine check I'd done before hiring her, but this time I was asking different questions. "Amanda Richardson," came the crisp voice after 2 rings. "Ms. Richardson, this is Rebecca Martinez from Martinez Marketing Solutions. We spoke about 18 months ago regarding Jessica Walsh, who was applying for a position with our company." "Of course, I remember Jessica. Bright girl, very talented. How is she working out for you?" "Actually, that's what I'm calling about. I'm updating our personnel files and wanted to verify a few details about her employment with your firm. When exactly did she leave your company?" There was a pause, the sound of papers rustling. "Let me check her file. Jessica Walsh, junior consultant, employed from June 2019 to March 2022. Her resignation was effective March 15th. March 15th, 2022. Jessica had applied for the job at my company in April 2022 and started work in May, which meant there was only about a month between her resignation from the Chicago firm and her application to work for me. Standard timing for someone changing jobs. Nothing suspicious about it." "And her reason for leaving?" I asked. "Personal reasons, if I recall correctly. She mentioned wanting to move closer to family, maybe work for a smaller company where she could have more impact. Very amicable departure, no issues with her performance or conduct. Family. Jessica had told me during her interview that she was originally from this area, that she was excited about moving back home after spending several years in Chicago. Another lie, as it turned out, since she'd apparently moved here to be closer to David, not to reconnect with family roots. Did she mention anything about personal relationships? A boyfriend or fiancé who might have influenced her decision to relocate?" Another pause, longer this time. "I'm not sure I should be discussing Jessica's personal life," Amanda said carefully. "Is there some kind of problem?" "Nothing specific," I lied smoothly. "We're just trying to get a complete picture of her background for a security clearance she's applying for. You know how thorough those government checks can be." Ah, well, in that case. I don't recall Jessica mentioning anyone specific, but she did seem happier toward the end of her employment here. More focused, more confident. The kind of change you see when someone has found something meaningful outside of work, if you know what I mean. I knew exactly what she meant. Jessica had been planning her move to my city, planning her relationship with David, planning her infiltration of my company. And she'd been happy about it, because she could see her carefully constructed scheme beginning to take shape. After I hung up with Amanda Richardson, I spent the rest of the morning reviewing client files and trying to determine which information would be most valuable to a competitor. My company's success was built on a combination of factors: innovative marketing strategies, deep understanding of local market conditions, strong relationships with key clients, and the kind of personal attention that larger firms couldn't provide. If someone wanted to replicate our success or undermine our client relationships, they would need access to all of those elements. Jessica had been positioned to gather exactly that kind of intelligence. Around 11 o'clock, my assistant knocked on my office door with her usual Monday morning scheduling update. Patricia had been with me since the company's early days, a supremely competent woman in her 50s who managed my calendar with military precision and somehow always knew exactly what I needed before I knew it myself. "Your Tuesday staff meeting is confirmed for 2 p.m., she said, consulting her tablet.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
The Morrison account presentation is scheduled for Thursday morning, and Jessica asked if she could review the preliminary findings with you sometime this week before the client meeting. Jessica wanted to review the Morrison account findings. Of course she did. Morrison Industries was one of our largest clients, a manufacturing company that had been struggling with brand recognition issues for the past 2 years. We'd been working on a comprehensive rebranding strategy that included everything from logo design to market positioning to digital advertising campaigns. The preliminary findings represented months of research and analysis, the kind of proprietary information that would be extremely valuable to a competing consulting firm. "Schedule that review for Wednesday afternoon," I told Patricia. "And Patricia, from now on, I want to personally approve any client files that leave this office. No exceptions." Patricia raised an eyebrow but didn't question the new policy. She'd been in business long enough to recognize when her boss was operating in crisis management mode, even if she didn't know the specific reason why. After Patricia left, I called my lawyer. Richard Chen was a sharp, no-nonsense attorney who specialized in business law and employment issues. He'd handled the legal aspects of my divorce from David, so he was already familiar with our family's complicated dynamics. "Rebecca, good to hear from you," Richard said when his secretary put my call through. "How are you settling in after Marcus's wedding? I heard it was a beautiful ceremony." "It was lovely, thank you. But I'm calling about a business matter. I need to schedule a consultation about employee confidentiality agreements and potential corporate espionage." The change in Richard's tone was immediate. "That sounds serious. Are we talking about current employees or former employees?" "Current." "And Richard? This is extremely confidential. I don't want anyone in your office discussing this matter, except with me directly." "Understood. Can you be here this afternoon? I have an opening at 3:30. Richard's office was located in a converted Victorian mansion downtown, the kind of building that projected both stability and discretion. I'd been there many times over the years for various business matters, but today the familiar surroundings felt different. Today I was there not as a successful entrepreneur seeking routine legal advice, but as someone who'd discovered that her trust had been weaponized against her. Richard listened without interruption as I explained what I'd discovered at Marcus's wedding, how Jessica Walsh had been working for my company while engaged to my ex-husband, how she'd had access to confidential client information for 18 months. When I finished, he sat back in his leather chair and steepled his fingers in the gesture I recognized as his thinking pose. "The first question," he said finally, "is whether Jessica has actually violated any laws. Having access to information isn't the same as misusing it. If she hasn't copied files, forwarded confidential documents, or used proprietary information to benefit a competitor, then we're talking about a potential ethical violation rather than a criminal one. But she lied about her identity, about her relationship to David. Doesn't that constitute fraud? Possibly, but it would be difficult to prove damages unless you can demonstrate that her deception resulted in actual financial losses. The fact that she's been a good employee who hasn't caused any obvious problems actually works against us in that regard. I felt a surge of frustration. So there's nothing we can do? I didn't say that, Richard replied carefully. I said it would be difficult to pursue criminal charges based on what you've told me so far. But there are other options. Civil litigation, employment termination for cause, non-compete enforcement if she tries to use your information to benefit a competitor. The key is gathering evidence of actual wrongdoing, not just potential wrongdoing. What kind of evidence? Copied files, forwarded emails, documented conversations about client strategies with unauthorized parties. The IT audit you mentioned is a good start. If Jessica has been accessing information she doesn't need for her job duties, or if she's been copying files to external drives, that would give us something concrete to work with. We spent another hour discussing the legal implications of various scenarios. If Jessica had simply been gathering information without acting on it, my options were limited. If she'd been sharing confidential information with David or other unauthorized parties, I could pursue both civil and criminal remedies. If she was planning to leave my company and start a competing business using my client relationships and proprietary strategies, I could seek injunctive relief to prevent her from doing so. But all of those options required proof, and proof required evidence that I didn't have yet. By the time I left Richard's office, my strategy was becoming clearer. I needed to document everything Jessica had done, everything she'd accessed, every interaction she'd had with clients, or confidential information. I needed to understand not just what she'd gathered, but what she and David were planning to do with it. And I needed to do all of this without alerting Jessica to the fact that her cover had been blown. It was going to require patience, careful planning, and the kind of strategic thinking that had built my company from nothing into a successful enterprise. Fortunately, those were skills I'd been developing for the past 6 years. Tuesday morning brought the first real test of my ability to maintain normal appearances while conducting a covert investigation. The weekly staff meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m., which meant I'd be sitting across a conference table from Jessica for the better part of an hour, while discussing current projects and client strategies. I'd done it dozens of times before, but today it felt like preparing for a performance where one wrong gesture could reveal that the entire script had changed. I arrived at the office early and spent the morning reviewing my notes from the IT audit Gary had started running the previous day. The preliminary results were interesting, though not yet conclusive. Jessica had accessed client files at a rate consistent with her job responsibilities, but she'd also spent time reviewing accounts that weren't assigned to her. Nothing overtly suspicious, but suggestive of someone who was gathering information beyond what she needed for her specific projects. More telling was the pattern of her email activity. Jessica sent significantly fewer emails than other employees at her level, which could suggest that she was conducting sensitive communications through personal accounts or other channels that wouldn't leave digital traces in our company system. It was exactly the kind of behavior I'd expect from someone who was conscious of being monitored. The staff meeting started promptly at 2 p.m., with my core team gathered around the oval conference table in our main meeting room. Besides Jessica, there was Michael Torres, my senior consultant who handled our largest accounts, Amanda Kim, our creative director who managed all design and branding projects, and David Chen, our digital marketing specialist who wasn't related to my lawyer despite sharing the same last name. These people were the heart of my company, trusted professionals who'd helped build our reputation and grow our client base. The thought that one of them had been systematically betraying that trust for 18 months made my skin crawl, but I kept my expression neutral and professional. Let's start with client updates, I said, opening the leather portfolio where I kept meeting notes. Michael, how are things progressing with the Henderson account? Michael launched into a detailed report about the hotel chain's rebranding project, discussing timeline adjustments and budget considerations with the kind of thorough analysis that made him invaluable to our operation. I listened with half my attention while watching Jessica's face, looking for any signs that she was paying unusual attention to information about accounts that weren't her responsibility. She seemed engaged but not overly focused, asking appropriate questions and taking notes at a pace consistent with someone who was interested but not desperately gathering intelligence. Either she was very good at concealing her true motivations, or she'd already gathered whatever information she needed about the Henderson account. "Jessica, how about Morrison Industries?" I asked when Michael finished his report. "Are you ready for Thursday's presentation?" Jessica straightened in her chair, consulting her own notes with the kind of professional confidence I'd always found reassuring. "I think we're in good shape," she said. "The market research data supports our recommendation for a more aggressive digital presence, and the focus group results show strong positive response to the proposed logo redesign. I've been working with Amanda on the visual components, and I think we have a compelling package to present." She was good, I had to admit. Jessica delivered her update with exactly the right level of enthusiasm and confidence, providing enough detail to demonstrate her competence without revealing anything that seemed calculated or suspicious. If I hadn't known about her relationship with David, I would have been pleased with her progress and proud of the professional development she'd shown over the past 18 months. "What's your read on Morrison's budget flexibility?" asked David Chin. "They seemed pretty cost-conscious during the initial meetings." "I think they're willing to invest if we can demonstrate clear ROI," Jessica replied. "The preliminary findings suggest that their brand recognition issues are costing them significantly more than our proposed solution would. It's really just a matter of presenting the financial case in terms they can understand." Again, exactly the kind of analysis I'd expect from a competent consultant. But now I was hearing it through the filter of knowing that Jessica might be planning to use this information to compete against us for Morrison's business, or to help David understand which of our clients might be vulnerable to poaching. The meeting continued for another 40 minutes, covering project updates, scheduling adjustments, and strategic planning for the next quarter. Jessica participated normally, contributing ideas and asking relevant questions without any obvious attempts to gather information beyond what she needed for her assigned responsibilities. When the meeting ended and everyone filed out of the conference room, I asked Jessica to stay behind for a few minutes. She settled back into her chair with the kind of relaxed attention that suggested she wasn't worried about why I wanted to speak with her privately. "I wanted to follow up on something from Marcus's wedding," I said, keeping my tone casual and conversational. "I met your fiancé, David. He seems like a lovely man." Jessica's smile was immediate and apparently genuine. "Thank you. He really is wonderful. I feel very lucky to have found him." "How long have you two been together? I know these things can move quickly when you're older and more sure of what you want." "About a year now," Jessica said, repeating the same timeline she'd given at the wedding. "You're right about things moving quickly. When you know, right?" Another lie, delivered with the same confident sincerity she brought to client presentations. I wondered if she'd practiced this conversation, if she and David had rehearsed answers to the questions they thought I might ask. "It's wonderful that you've found happiness," I said. I have to admit, David looked familiar to me at the wedding, but I couldn't place where I might have met him. "Do you know if he's ever done any work with marketing companies?" I watched Jessica's face carefully as I asked the question, looking for any flicker of recognition or concern. Her expression remained pleasantly neutral, but something shifted almost imperceptibly in her posture. "I don't think so," she said after a barely perceptible pause. "David's a dentist, so his marketing needs are pretty basic." "Why do you ask?" "Oh, you know how it is in a smaller business community. Everyone seems to know everyone eventually. I probably just saw him at some networking event or charity function." Jessica nodded in agreement, but I noticed that her hands had gone still on the conference table. Before, she'd been absently adjusting her pen and notebook in the kind of unconscious fidgeting that most people do during casual conversation. Now her movements were controlled, deliberate, the behavior of someone who was consciously managing their body language. "Well," I said, standing up to signal the end of our conversation, "I should let you get back to the Morrison presentation. Let me know if you need anything before Thursday." "Actually," Jessica said, rising from her chair with what seemed like calculated casualness, "I was wondering if you'd be interested in having dinner sometime. David and I would love to have you over. Maybe this weekend. He mentioned that you two knew each other years ago, and I think he'd enjoy catching up." The invitation was so audacious that I almost laughed. Jessica was suggesting that I have dinner with her and my ex-husband, apparently believing that I hadn't recognized David at the wedding or connected him to the man who destroyed our marriage with his affair. Either she thought I was incredibly naive, or she was testing me to see how much I actually knew about their relationship. "That's very thoughtful," I replied, matching her casual tone perfectly. "Let me check my schedule and get back to you." Of course, no pressure at all. I just thought it might be nice to get to know each other better outside of work. After Jessica left the conference room, I sat alone for several minutes thinking about the conversation we just had. Every word had been carefully chosen, every response calculated to maintain the fiction that we were simply employer and employee discussing personal matters. But underneath the surface civility, we'd been playing a completely different game. Jessica was testing me, trying to determine whether I'd recognized David and connected him to our shared history. I was testing her, trying to understand how much she knew about my knowledge of their relationship. We were both operating with incomplete information, both trying to gather intelligence while revealing as little as possible about our true intentions. It was exactly the kind of strategic thinking that had made me successful in business, but it was exhausting to apply those skills to what should have been straightforward personal relationships. Every interaction now required analysis. Every conversation had to be evaluated for hidden meanings and ulterior motives. Wednesday afternoon brought my scheduled review of the Morrison Industries presentation materials. Jessica knocked on my office door at exactly 3 p.m., carrying a leather portfolio and the kind of confident expression that had made me trust her professional judgment for the past 18 months. "Come in," I said, gesturing toward the chairs arranged in front of my desk. "Show me what you've put together." Jessica spread the presentation materials across my desk with practiced efficiency. Market research data, competitive analysis charts, proposed logo designs, budget projections, timeline estimates. It was comprehensive, well-organized, and exactly the kind of thorough preparation I'd expect from a senior consultant. As she walked me through each component, I found myself genuinely impressed, despite knowing about her ulterior motives. Jessica was good at her job, probably better than I'd fully appreciated. Her analysis was sharp, her recommendations were sound, and her presentation strategy was designed to address Morrison Industries' specific concerns while highlighting our company's unique strengths, which made her betrayal even more galling. Jessica could have been a genuine asset to my company, a trusted team member who helped build our success while advancing her own career. Instead, she'd chosen to use her talents for deception and manipulation, turning her competence into a weapon designed to gather intelligence for purposes I was only beginning to understand. "This is excellent work," I told her when she finished the presentation, and I meant it. "Morrison Industries is going to be impressed with the level of analysis you've done." "Thank you," Jessica said, her pleasure at the compliment seeming genuine. "I've really enjoyed working on this project. Manufacturing companies face such interesting challenges in today's market. What do you think our chances are of winning the expanded contract?" "I'd say very good, assuming we can demonstrate clear ROI and stay within their budget parameters. They're spending a fortune on traditional advertising that isn't generating measurable results. Our digital strategy should cut their marketing costs while increasing brand visibility significantly." Jessica's assessment was probably accurate, which raised an interesting question. If she and David were planning to compete against my company for clients like Morrison Industries, they would need this kind of detailed market analysis and strategic insight. By doing excellent work on the Morrison account, Jessica was potentially preparing materials that could be used against us later. "I'd like you to prepare a supplementary analysis," I said, making the decision as I spoke. "Something we can use for future manufacturing clients who might have similar challenges. Strip out the Morrison-specific details and create a template we can adapt for other presentations." It was a test, though Jessica wouldn't know it. If she was planning to leave my company and compete against us, she would probably be enthusiastic about creating materials that she could later claim as her own work. If she was genuinely committed to our team's success, she might question whether developing such templates was the best use of her time. "That's a great idea," Jessica said immediately. "Manufacturing is definitely a growth sector for us, and having template materials would make us more efficient in developing proposals for similar clients." Another data point in favor of the theory that Jessica was positioning herself to compete against my company. A loyal employee might have suggested focusing on the current client before developing materials for hypothetical future accounts. We spent another 20 minutes discussing implementation details and timeline considerations. Jessica was engaged, thoughtful, and apparently committed to delivering excellent work for Morrison Industries. But now I was analyzing every suggestion she made, every insight she offered, through the lens of whether it could be used against my company's interests. It was like discovering that your most trusted advisor had been secretly working for your competitors while appearing to help you succeed. Every piece of good advice became suspect. Every strategic insight had to be evaluated for hidden purposes. Every professional relationship had to be examined for signs of manipulation. After Jessica left my office, I sat staring at the Morrison Industries presentation materials and trying to process the cognitive dissonance of what I'd just experienced. Jessica was genuinely talented. Her work was legitimately excellent, and her recommendations would probably help Morrison Industries solve their branding challenges successfully. But she was also lying to me every day, maintaining a fictional identity while gathering information that could be used to destroy everything I'd built. The combination of professional competence and personal betrayal was almost impossible to reconcile. Gary called at 4:30 with the preliminary results of his deep forensic analysis. What he'd found was both more and less damning than I'd expected. Gary's voice carried the weight of someone delivering news that would change everything. "Rebecca, we need to talk in person. What I found goes beyond what we discussed yesterday." I gripped the phone tighter, watching through my office window as Jessica's silver Honda pulled out of the parking lot for her lunch break. "How bad is it? Let's just say you're going to want to see this evidence firsthand. Can you meet me at my office in an hour?" Gary's office occupied the basement of a nondescript strip mall, the kind of location that suggested either extreme frugality or a deliberate desire to avoid attention. As I descended the narrow staircase, I could hear the hum of multiple computer servers and smell the distinctive ozone scent of electronic equipment running at full capacity. Gary emerged from behind a wall of monitors, his usually rumpled appearance even more disheveled than normal. "Show me," I said without preamble. He gestured toward a large monitor displaying what looked like a complex spreadsheet filled with timestamps, file names, and user access codes. "This is 18 months of Jessica Walsh's digital activity on your company's network. The surface level looks normal, but when you dig deeper, patterns emerge." Gary clicked through several screens, highlighting specific entries with a laser pointer. "She's been accessing client files consistently, but not randomly. There's a systematic approach here. She started with your smallest accounts and worked her way up to the most valuable ones. And look at this. The next screen showed email metadata, long strings of technical information that meant nothing to me, but apparently told Gary everything he needed to know. Jessica sends about 40% fewer emails than other employees at her level. But here's the interesting part. She's been using the company's shared drive to transfer files to external storage devices on a regular basis." "What kind of files?" "Client contact lists, project timelines, budget information, strategic planning documents. Individually, each transfer could be explained as normal work activity. Someone preparing for a client meeting might legitimately need to copy files to a laptop or tablet. But the pattern suggests something else entirely." Gary pulled up another screen showing a timeline of Jessica's file transfers. "She's been copying information in bursts, usually on Friday afternoons or Monday mornings when the office is less busy. And she's been careful to space out the transfers so they don't appear suspicious if anyone happened to review the access logs casually." I studied the timeline, feeling a cold certainty settle in my chest. She's been building a complete database of our client relationships and business strategies. That's my assessment, and there's more. Gary clicked to another screen. "Jessica has been accessing your personal files as well. Calendar information, travel schedules, meeting notes. She knows where you are and what you're doing at any given time." The violation felt like a physical assault. Jessica hadn't just been gathering information about my business. She'd been tracking my personal life, monitoring my movements, studying my habits and routines with the thoroughness of a stalker. Is there any evidence that she's transmitted this information to external parties? Not through your company's email system, but she could easily be using personal accounts, encrypted messaging apps, or even physical storage devices to share information. What I can tell you is that she's definitely been gathering it systematically. I spent another hour reviewing Gary's findings, trying to understand the full scope of what Jessica had accomplished. The evidence was damning but also sophisticated. She'd been careful to avoid obvious red flags, spacing out her activities and maintaining plausible explanations for everything she'd accessed. If I hadn't been specifically looking for signs of deception, her behavior would have appeared completely normal. When I finally left Gary's office, my phone was already buzzing with afternoon messages. The most important was from Richard Chen, my lawyer, requesting an urgent meeting to discuss new developments in what we were now calling the Walsh matter. Richard's office felt different this time, more like a war room than a place for routine legal consultation. He'd spread documents across his conference table and had obviously been researching corporate espionage laws with the intensity of someone preparing for battle. "The evidence Gary gathered changes everything," Richard said as soon as I sat down. "We now have documented proof that Jessica has been systematically accessing and copying confidential information. That's grounds for immediate termination and potentially criminal charges." What are our options? Several, and they're not mutually exclusive. We can terminate her employment immediately for cause, which would prevent her from claiming unemployment benefits and might discourage her from filing wrongful termination suits. We can pursue civil litigation for breach of fiduciary duty and theft of trade secrets. And we can file criminal complaints for computer fraud and corporate espionage. Richard spread several legal documents across the table. But here's what I find most interesting. The systematic nature of Jessica's data collection suggests she's not working alone. This level of planning and coordination indicates that someone with business experience has been directing her activities. David, almost certainly. Which means we're not just dealing with an employee who's been copying files. We're dealing with a conspiracy to steal your business's competitive advantages and client relationships. The word conspiracy felt dramatic, like something from a television show, rather than my actual life. But the evidence supported Richard's assessment. Jessica's 18 months of careful intelligence gathering hadn't been random or opportunistic. It had been strategic, methodical, designed to accomplish specific goals that required extensive business knowledge and planning. What do you recommend? Richard leaned back in his chair, adopting the thoughtful expression I'd learned to recognize as his strategic planning mode. Normally, I'd advise immediate termination and aggressive legal action. But in this case, I think we should consider a more subtle approach. Such as, Jessica doesn't know that we've discovered her activities. She's still operating under the assumption that her cover is intact. That gives us a significant advantage if we're willing to use it. I felt a smile spread across my face for the first time in days. You're suggesting we feed her false information. I'm suggesting we control the flow of information very carefully while building an even stronger case against her and her conspirators. If we can document Jessica sharing false information with David, we'll have ironclad proof of the conspiracy. And if we can get them to act on that false information, we might be able to damage their plans while protecting your legitimate business interests. The strategy appealed to me on multiple levels. Rather than simply reacting to Jessica's betrayal, I could take control of the situation and turn her deception against her. It would require patience and careful planning, but those were skills I'd been developing for years. What kind of false information? That depends on what you think they're planning to do with what they've stolen. Are they trying to steal your clients? Start a competing business? Sell your strategies to other consulting firms? I thought about David's history, his weaknesses, his tendency to take shortcuts when he thought nobody was watching. David's not smart enough to build a successful consulting business from scratch. But he might be arrogant enough to think he could steal my clients and my employees to create an instant competitor. Then we give them information that would make such a plan extremely difficult to execute. We spent the next 2 hours developing what Richard called a controlled information strategy. I would continue treating Jessica as a trusted employee while carefully managing what information she could access. Key client files would be moved to secure servers that required special authorization. New projects would be compartmentalized so that no single employee could access complete strategic plans. And most importantly, we would begin feeding Jessica carefully crafted false information designed to mislead anyone who might be planning to compete against my company. By the time I left Richard's office, I felt like a general preparing for war rather than a business owner dealing with an employee problem. The next phase of this conflict would require precision, patience, and the kind of strategic thinking that had built my company in the first place. Thursday morning brought the Morrison Industries presentation, and with it the first real test of my ability to maintain normal operations while conducting a covert counterintelligence campaign. Jessica arrived at the office early, carrying the presentation materials we'd reviewed the previous day and wearing the kind of confident expression that came from thorough preparation. "Ready for this?" she asked as we loaded our materials into my car for the drive to Morrison's headquarters. "Absolutely. You've done excellent work on this project." The compliment was genuine, which made the situation even more surreal. Jessica had prepared an outstanding presentation that would probably win us a significant contract expansion. She was about to help my company succeed while simultaneously working to destroy it, and she was doing both tasks with equal competence and apparent dedication. Morrison Industries occupied a sprawling campus on the outskirts of town, the kind of facility that spoke of old money and generational success. James Morrison III, the company's current CEO, had inherited a business built by his grandfather and had spent the past decade trying to modernize operations while maintaining the family's reputation for quality and reliability. The presentation went exactly as Jessica had predicted. Morrison and his marketing team were impressed with our research, engaged by our strategic recommendations, and clearly interested in moving forward with an expanded contract. Jessica handled their questions with confidence and expertise, demonstrating the kind of deep understanding that came from months of careful analysis. As we packed up our materials after the meeting, Morrison pulled me aside for a private conversation. "Rebecca, I have to say I'm impressed with your team's work. Jessica, in particular, seems to have a real grasp of our industry's challenges." "She's one of our most talented consultants," I replied, the words feeling strange in my mouth given what I now knew about Jessica's true motivations. "I'd like to move forward with the expanded contract. Can you have a formal proposal ready by next week?" "Absolutely. Jessica will coordinate the details with your team." The drive back to the office was filled with Jessica's analysis of the meeting, her excitement about the potential contract expansion, and her ideas for implementing the marketing strategies we'd proposed. She was genuinely enthusiastic about the project's success, apparently seeing no contradiction between helping my company win new business and planning to steal our client relationships for David's benefit. "I think we should celebrate," Jessica said as we pulled into the parking lot. "This could be our biggest contract expansion this year." "You're right. Why don't you organize something for the team? Maybe take everyone out for drinks after work tomorrow." Jessica's face lit up with what appeared to be genuine pleasure. "That's a great idea. I'll make reservations somewhere nice." Watching her excitement, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Pride in my company's success, satisfaction at Jessica's professional competence, and growing anger at the elaborate deception she'd been maintaining for 18 months. She was celebrating a victory that she was simultaneously planning to use against me, and she was doing it with apparent sincerity. That afternoon, I implemented the first phase of Richard's controlled information strategy. I called Jessica into my office and closed the door with the kind of serious expression that suggested confidential business discussion. "I want to discuss something sensitive," I said, activating the white noise machine I used for private conversations. "We've been approached by Hartwell Manufacturing about a potential acquisition." Jessica's eyebrows rose in genuine surprise. "An acquisition? Of Morrison Industries?" "No. Of us. Hartwell is interested in purchasing Martinez Marketing Solutions to expand their in-house consulting capabilities. They're offering a substantial premium over our current valuation." The information was completely fabricated, designed to test whether Jessica would share confidential business intelligence with David. Hartwell Manufacturing was a real company, but they had never expressed any interest in acquiring my business. If this false information reached David, I would know for certain that Jessica was sharing confidential information about company operations. "Are you considering it?" Jessica asked, her voice carefully neutral. I'm not sure. The offer is generous, but I've spent 6 years building this company. It would be difficult to walk away from everything we've accomplished. What would happen to the employees? Hartwell has indicated they'd retain most of the current staff, though there might be some restructuring. They're particularly interested in our client relationships and proprietary methodologies. I watched Jessica's face carefully as I delivered this false information, looking for any signs that she was calculating how to use it. Her expression remained professionally interested, but I noticed that her hands had gone still on her notepad, the same controlled body language I'd observed during our previous conversation about David. When do you need to make a decision? They want an answer within 2 weeks. I'd appreciate it if you kept this confidential for now. I don't want the team worrying about job security until I've had time to fully evaluate the offer. Of course, this stays between us. Another lie, delivered with the same confident sincerity Jessica brought to all her deceptions. I had no doubt that David would know about Hartwell Manufacturing's fictional acquisition offer before the end of the week. Friday afternoon brought the team celebration Jessica had organized at Meridian, an upscale restaurant downtown that catered to business professionals and special occasions. The entire staff was there, along with Patricia and even Gary, who rarely socialized outside of work hours. Jessica had chosen well, booking a private dining room where we could celebrate the Morrison Industries' success without disrupting other patrons. As I watched my employees laugh and share stories over excellent food and wine, I felt the familiar satisfaction that came from building something meaningful with talented people who shared my vision. These were good people, dedicated professionals who'd helped create a company culture based on excellence, integrity, and mutual respect. All except for Jessica, who was sitting across from me sharing funny stories about client meetings while maintaining the most elaborate deception I'd ever encountered. The irony was inescapable. Jessica was genuinely good at her job, well-liked by her colleagues, and capable of contributing significantly to our company's success. Under different circumstances, she might have become the kind of trusted senior consultant who helped train new employees and develop innovative strategies for challenging clients. Instead, she'd chosen to use her talents for betrayal, turning every professional interaction into an opportunity for espionage, and every moment of trust into a weapon designed to destroy what we'd built together. As the evening progressed, I found myself studying Jessica's interactions with the rest of the team. She was charming, engaging, apparently genuine in her relationships with colleagues who had no idea that their friendly coworker was systematically gathering intelligence about their workplace. Did she feel any guilt about deceiving people who trusted her? Did she ever question the ethics of her elaborate charade? Or had she convinced herself that corporate espionage was simply another form of business competition? Around 9 o'clock, Jessica approached me near the bar where I was waiting for the bartender to prepare another round of drinks for the table. Rebecca, I wanted to thank you again for giving me the opportunity to work on the Morrison account. Projects like this are exactly why I wanted to join a smaller firm where I could have real impact. The gratitude seemed genuine, which made it even more disturbing. Jessica was thanking me for providing opportunities that she was planning to use against my company's interests. She was expressing appreciation for trust that she'd been systematically violating for 18 months. You've earned every opportunity you've been given, I replied. Your work on Morrison was exceptional. I've learned so much working here. The way you've built this company, the relationships you've developed with clients, the strategies you've created for different industries. It's been an incredible education. An education that she was planning to use to compete against me, though she obviously couldn't say that directly. I wondered if Jessica felt any internal conflict about expressing gratitude to someone she was actively betraying, or if she'd compartmentalized her emotions so thoroughly that she could genuinely appreciate my mentorship while planning to use it against me. I'm glad you found it valuable, I said carefully. Building a successful consulting practice requires understanding not just marketing strategies, but client psychology, competitive dynamics, and market positioning. It's the kind of knowledge that takes years to develop. Exactly. That's what makes working here so special. You can't learn this stuff in business school or by reading case studies. It requires real-world experience with actual clients facing genuine challenges. Quote, Jessica was describing precisely what she'd been stealing from my company, though she was framing it as professional development rather than corporate espionage. Every client meeting she'd attended, every strategy session she'd participated in, every confidential document she'd accessed had been part of her business education. The difference was that most employees used that education to advance their careers within the company that provided it, while Jessica was planning to use it to destroy her employer. The weekend passed quietly, giving me time to process everything that had happened over the past week and plan my next moves. I spent Saturday morning in my garden, pulling weeds and trimming bushes while thinking about the strategic challenges ahead. The physical work was therapeutic, providing a counterbalance to the mental intensity of managing a covert investigation while maintaining normal business operations. Sunday brought an unexpected phone call from Marcus, checking in on how I was adjusting after the wedding and asking about my impressions of Jessica. "She seemed really nice, Mom. Dad looked happy, and she was great with Sarah's family. I know it must be weird for you, seeing Dad with someone new, but I'm glad he found someone who makes him smile again." If only Marcus knew how much his father was smiling, and why. "She did seem lovely," I agreed, choosing my words carefully. "Very intelligent and well-spoken. Dad certainly has good taste. I was thinking we should have everyone over for dinner sometime. You, Dad, Jessica, maybe Sarah's parents if they're in town. Just a big family gathering to celebrate the marriage and introduce everyone properly." The suggestion made my stomach turn. The thought of sitting around a dinner table with David and Jessica, pretending to be one big happy family while they were actively working to destroy my business, was almost unbearable. But I couldn't explain my real feelings to Marcus without revealing information that would shatter his happiness and poison his relationship with his father. "That sounds lovely, sweetheart. Let me check my schedule and see what works." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring out at the garden and thinking about the impossible position Jessica and David had put me in. They weren't just stealing from my business. They were using my son's wedding and his desire for family harmony as cover for their deception. Every family gathering would now be an opportunity for them to gather more intelligence while maintaining their fictional personas. The manipulation was so thorough, so calculated, that it took my breath away. They'd turned my own son into an unwitting accomplice in their scheme, using his love and trust to gain access to family events where they could study me more closely and gather personal information that might be useful for their plans. Monday morning brought a call from Gary with an update on his monitoring of Jessica's digital activities. She'd accessed several client files over the weekend, including accounts that weren't related to any current projects she was working on. More importantly, she'd copied those files to an external storage device during a brief visit to the office on Saturday afternoon. "She's definitely accelerating her data collection," Gary reported, "and the timing suggests she might be working towards some kind of deadline." What kind of deadline? Hard to say without more information. But people don't typically increase their espionage activities unless they're planning to act on the intelligence they've gathered. The conversation left me feeling unsettled and impatient. How long were Jessica and David planning to continue their charade? What were they waiting for? And most importantly, what was their ultimate goal? I got my answer Tuesday morning when Jessica knocked on my office door with an expression that managed to combine professional confidence with what appeared to be genuine nervousness. "Rebecca, could I speak with you privately? I have something important to discuss." I gestured toward the chairs in front of my desk, activating the white noise machine with the kind of automatic gesture that Jessica had probably seen dozens of times over the past 18 months. "What's on your mind?" Jessica took a deep breath, settling into her chair with the posture of someone preparing to deliver carefully rehearsed information. "I've been offered another job opportunity, and I wanted to discuss it with you before making any decisions." There it was. The endgame Jessica and David had been working toward for 18 months. She was preparing to leave my company, presumably to start a competing business, using all the intelligence she'd gathered about my clients, strategies, and operations. "That's certainly worth discussing," I said, keeping my voice neutral despite the satisfaction I felt at finally understanding their timeline. "What kind of opportunity?" "A senior consulting position with a new firm that's being established here in town. They're looking for experienced professionals who understand the local market and have established client relationships." Established client relationships. Jessica was being remarkably direct about her intentions to steal my clients. though she was framing it as career advancement rather than corporate theft. Who's starting this new firm? Actually, it's Dr. David Martinez. He's decided to diversify his business interests beyond dentistry and feels that marketing consulting represents a significant growth opportunity. The audacity was breathtaking. Jessica was telling me that my ex-husband was starting a competing business and wanted to hire her, apparently believing I had no idea about their relationship or their 18-month conspiracy. She was treating me like a naive fool who could be manipulated with obviously fabricated stories. Dr. Martinez, I repeated thoughtfully, as if trying to place the name. That sounds familiar. Have I met him? I believe you might have crossed paths at Marcus's wedding. He's your ex-husband. Jessica delivered this information with the kind of carefully neutral tone that suggested she was revealing a potentially awkward coincidence, rather than exposing an elaborate deception. The performance was so brazen that I almost admired the sheer nerve it required. How interesting, I said, allowing just a hint of surprise to color my voice. Small world. What kind of consulting services is David planning to offer? Full-service marketing consulting, with a focus on small to medium-sized businesses in professional services industries, medical practices, law firms, financial planning companies. The kind of clients who need sophisticated marketing strategies but don't have the budget for large consulting firms. In other words, exactly the market niche my company had spent 6 years developing, using exactly the strategies and client relationships Jessica had been systematically copying for 18 months. That does sound like an interesting opportunity for you, I said carefully. What would your role be? Senior consultant, with the possibility of partnership if the business grows as projected. David feels that my experience and client relationships would be valuable assets for the new firm. My client relationships. Jessica was openly discussing her plans to steal my clients while framing it as a legitimate career opportunity. The brazenness was almost impressive in its complete disregard for professional ethics or basic honesty. When would this transition happen? David is hoping to launch the new firm within the next month. He's already secured office space and is in the process of developing marketing materials and client outreach strategies. A month. Jessica and David had been planning this for 18 months, and they were finally ready to execute their scheme. Which meant I had exactly 4 weeks to decide how I wanted to respond to their betrayal. I appreciate you coming to me directly rather than simply submitting a resignation letter, I said. How much time do you need to make your decision? David would like an answer by the end of this week. I know it's short notice, but he's eager to move forward quickly. Of course he was. David had never been patient when it came to getting what he wanted, whether it was dental patients or other men's wives, or business opportunities built on stolen intelligence. I understand. Take the time you need to consider all your options. This is obviously a significant career decision. After Jessica left my office, I sat alone for several minutes processing what had just happened. The conspiracy I'd suspected for the past week had been confirmed beyond any doubt. Jessica wasn't just gathering intelligence about my business. She was preparing to use that intelligence to compete directly against me, stealing my clients and my strategies, while David provided the financial backing and business credibility. They'd played a long game, longer and more sophisticated than I'd initially realized. Jessica had spent 18 months positioning herself as a trusted employee, while systematically gathering everything she needed to replicate my business model. David had provided the strategic guidance and financial resources, using his professional reputation to create credibility for their new venture. Together, they'd created a plan that could potentially destroy everything I'd built over the past 6 years. But they'd made one critical mistake. They'd underestimated me, assuming that I was naive enough to be manipulated by obvious lies and too trusting to suspect their elaborate deception. They thought they were dealing with a scorned ex-wife who could be easily deceived and outmaneuvered. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Wednesday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that made every detail seem sharper, every color more vivid. I had spent the night crafting what Richard called our nuclear option, a comprehensive strategy designed to turn Jessica and David's elaborate deception into the instrument of their own destruction. By the time the sun rose over the parking lot outside my office windows, I felt the calm certainty of a chess player who had finally seen the path to checkmate. The first move was deceptively simple. I called Jessica into my office at exactly 9 a.m. and delivered the news that would set everything in motion. "I've been thinking about your job offer," I said, settling behind my desk with the kind of composed expression I'd perfected during years of difficult client negotiations. "And I think you should take it." Jessica's surprise was immediate and apparently genuine. She'd probably expected me to try to convince her to stay, to offer counteroffers, or express disappointment at losing such a valuable employee. Instead, I was encouraging her to leave, which clearly wasn't part of the script she and David had prepared for this conversation. "You do?" "Absolutely. Working with David Martinez could be an excellent opportunity for you. He has strong connections in the medical community, and there's definitely demand for specialized marketing services in that sector." The irony of encouraging Jessica to steal my business strategies while complimenting my ex-husband's potential as her business partner wasn't lost on me. But Jessica seemed to take my enthusiasm at face value, her posture relaxing as she processed what appeared to be unexpected support for her career transition. "I have to admit, I was worried you might be upset about the situation. I know it could seem awkward, given your history with David." "Business is business," I replied, with a dismissive wave. "Personal relationships shouldn't interfere with professional opportunities. Besides, I think competition is healthy for everyone involved. It keeps us all sharp." Jessica nodded enthusiastically, apparently believing that I was naive enough to view her betrayal as legitimate market competition. "That's exactly how David and I see it. He's very impressed with your company's success and thinks there's room in the market for multiple high-quality consulting firms." David was impressed with my company's success because Jessica had been providing him with detailed intelligence about exactly how that success had been achieved. But I simply smiled and nodded as if I found his professional admiration flattering rather than insulting. "When would you like to make this transition?" "David is hoping I can start next Monday. I know that's unusually short notice, but he's eager to begin serving clients as quickly as possible." "That works perfectly. It will give me the weekend to reassign your current projects and brief other team members on client relationships they'll be taking over." The speed of my acceptance clearly surprised Jessica, but she recovered quickly and began discussing transition details with the kind of professional competence that had made her so effective as a corporate spy. We spent 20 minutes reviewing her current responsibilities, identifying which projects needed immediate attention, and planning how to communicate her departure to clients and colleagues. Throughout the conversation, I maintained the facade of a supportive employer who was genuinely pleased about her employees' career advancement. But internally, I was calculating the precise timing required to execute the strategy Richard and I had developed over the past 72 hours. Jessica's departure would trigger a series of carefully orchestrated events designed to expose the full scope of her and David's conspiracy while protecting my company from the damage they'd intended to cause. By the time they realized what was happening, it would be too late to prevent the consequences of their 18-month deception. "There is one thing I'd like to discuss before you leave," I said as Jessica prepared to return to her desk. "The Morrison Industries account." Jessica straightened in her chair, clearly recognizing the importance of what had become our most significant client relationship. "Of course. I want to make sure the transition goes smoothly. Actually, I've been thinking about our conversation regarding template materials for other manufacturing clients. Given your departure, I'd like you to complete that project before you leave. Consider it your final contribution to the team." The request was perfectly reasonable from Jessica's perspective, a chance to finish important work and leave on a positive note. From my perspective, it was the first component of a carefully constructed trap that would provide definitive proof of her industrial espionage, while creating false intelligence that would undermine David's business plans. "I'd be happy to work on that," Jessica said immediately. "How detailed should the templates be?" "Very detailed. I want comprehensive analysis frameworks that we can adapt for any manufacturing client in the region. Include everything: market research methodologies, competitive analysis templates, budget projection models, client presentation formats. Make it a complete toolkit that could help us dominate the manufacturing consulting market." Jessica's eyes lit up with what appeared to be genuine enthusiasm for the project. She probably thought she was being handed a gift, a complete blueprint for the consulting services she and David planned to offer. Instead, she was volunteering to spend her final days at my company creating materials that would ultimately expose her theft and sabotage her new business venture. "I'll start working on it immediately," she said. "When do you need it completed?" Quote, "Friday afternoon would be perfect. That way, we can review everything together before your departure. After Jessica left my office, I immediately called Richard to confirm that all legal preparations were in place for what would happen the following week. Our strategy required precise timing and flawless execution, with multiple moving parts that had to coordinate perfectly to achieve maximum impact. Everything's ready, Richard confirmed. The employment termination documentation is prepared, the civil litigation papers are drafted, and I've been in contact with the district attorney's office about potential criminal charges. We're also prepared to seek immediate injunctive relief to prevent Jessica and David from using any proprietary information they've stolen. What about the false intelligence we're planting? That's the most elegant part of the entire strategy. By encouraging Jessica to create comprehensive templates based on fraudulent market data, we're not only proving her intent to steal proprietary information, but we're also sabotaging any business plans that rely on that information. The false market data I'd prepared was subtle but devastating. Financial projections that were optimistic by 20 to 30%, competitive analysis that overlooked key market players, client contact information that included disconnected phone numbers and incorrect email addresses, budget models that underestimated costs and overestimated revenue potential. Individually, each piece of misinformation was small enough to seem like a simple error. Collectively, they would make it nearly impossible for David and Jessica to successfully compete in the manufacturing consulting market, even if they managed to avoid criminal prosecution for their theft of proprietary information. Thursday morning brought a visit from Detective Maria Santos, a white-collar crime specialist whom Richard had contacted about the evidence we'd gathered regarding Jessica's corporate espionage. Detective Santos was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, who radiated the kind of quiet competence that suggested extensive experience with financial crimes and business fraud. I met her at a coffee shop several blocks from my office, a neutral location where we could discuss the case without risk of Jessica observing our conversation. Detective Santos reviewed the evidence Gary had gathered with the thoroughness of someone who understood both the technical and legal implications of corporate data theft. "This is definitely criminal behavior," she said after studying printouts of Jessica's file access logs and data transfers. "Computer fraud, theft of trade secrets, conspiracy to commit corporate espionage. We're talking about serious felony charges with potential prison time. What kind of timeline are we looking at for prosecution?" "That depends on how much additional evidence we can gather, and whether the suspects cooperate or try to fight the charges. But based on what you've shown me, I'd say we have enough for arrest warrants right now." Detective Santos explained the process for filing criminal complaints and coordinating with civil litigation efforts. The key was timing the arrest to maximize the legal impact while minimizing the potential for Jessica and David to destroy evidence or flee the jurisdiction. "I'd recommend waiting until Monday," she said. "Let Jessica complete her employment and take possession of whatever materials she's planning to steal. That way, we can catch her in the act of theft, rather than just intent to commit theft." The detective's timeline aligned perfectly with our strategy. By Monday afternoon, Jessica would have completed the template materials containing false intelligence, formally resigned from my company, and presumably delivered stolen proprietary information to David for use in their competing business. At that point, we would have documented evidence of every aspect of their conspiracy, from initial intelligence gathering to final theft of trade secrets. Friday afternoon arrived with Jessica knocking on my office door at exactly 3 p.m., carrying a thick binder containing the template materials I'd requested. Her expression radiated the kind of satisfaction that came from completing an important project, apparently unaware that she'd just created the evidence that would destroy her and David's carefully laid plans. "I think you're going to be very pleased with what I've put together," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk with obvious pride in her work. "These templates are comprehensive enough to handle any manufacturing client you might encounter." Jessica opened the binder and began walking me through her work with the kind of detailed enthusiasm that had made her such an effective employee. Market analysis frameworks, competitive research methodologies, financial projection models, client presentation templates. It was thorough, well organized, and exactly the kind of proprietary information that would be invaluable to a competing consulting firm. More importantly, it incorporated all of the false intelligence I'd carefully planted in the source materials Jessica had been accessing over the past week. Optimistic revenue projections, incomplete competitive analyses, inaccurate cost estimates, and client contact information that would lead David's new business directly into dead ends and disconnected phone calls. "This is exceptional work," I told her, and I meant it. Jessica had created exactly what I'd asked for: a comprehensive toolkit that demonstrated both her professional competence and her willingness to steal proprietary information for use against her employer. "I'm glad you're pleased. I wanted to leave something that would really benefit the team." The sincerity in Jessica's voice was almost breathtaking. She was expressing genuine concern for colleagues she was betraying, pride in work she was planning to steal, and affection for a company she was systematically undermining. The cognitive dissonance required to maintain such contradictory emotions was impressive in its completeness. "This will definitely benefit someone," I agreed, thinking about how much the district attorney would appreciate having such clear evidence of corporate espionage. We spent another 30 minutes reviewing the materials, with Jessica explaining her analytical approach and offering suggestions for how the templates might be customized for different types of manufacturing clients. Her insights were valuable, her recommendations were sound, and her enthusiasm was apparently genuine. She was also creating a detailed record of her knowledge of proprietary business strategies, her access to confidential client information, and her intent to use that information for unauthorized purposes. Every explanation she offered, every insight she shared, every suggestion she made was further evidence of the scope and sophistication of her industrial espionage. "I want you to keep the original binder," I said as our review concluded. "Consider it a parting gift and a thank you for all your excellent work over the past 18 months. Jessica's face lit up with what appeared to be genuine gratitude. "That's incredibly generous. Are you sure?" "Absolutely. You created it, you should have it." What I didn't mention was that the binder Jessica would be taking contained copies of the materials rather than originals, and that every page had been embedded with tracking technology that would allow us to monitor when and where the documents were accessed. The moment Jessica or David opened those files on any computer or mobile device, we would know exactly when they were using stolen proprietary information. "Thank you, Rebecca, for everything. Working here has been an incredible experience, and I've learned more than I ever thought possible. I'm sure you'll put that education to good use." Jessica left my office carrying the binder that would ultimately provide the final piece of evidence needed to prosecute her and David for conspiracy to commit corporate espionage. She walked out of my company for the last time, wearing an expression of satisfaction and anticipation, completely unaware that she was carrying the instrument of her own destruction. Monday morning arrived like the final act of a carefully orchestrated performance. I sat in my office at 7 a.m., watching through the window as Jessica's silver Honda failed to appear in the parking lot at her usual time. She was officially no longer my employee, having submitted her formal resignation on Friday afternoon, with a letter expressing gratitude for professional development opportunities and excitement about new challenges ahead. At exactly 9 a.m., my phone rang with a call from Gary confirming that the tracking technology embedded in Jessica's template materials had been activated. Someone had opened the files on a computer registered to David Martinez, DDS, accessing them remotely from an IP address associated with a shared office building downtown. "They're definitely using the materials," Gary reported. "Full access to all template files, with extensive time spent reviewing the market analysis and client contact sections. Perfect. Document everything." At 9:30, Richard called to confirm that Detective Santos was ready to execute arrest warrants for both Jessica and David. The charges included computer fraud, theft of trade secrets, conspiracy to commit corporate espionage, and unauthorized access to protected computer systems. The evidence package included 18 months of digital forensics data, documented proof of systematic information theft, and Jessica's own detailed confession in the form of the template materials she'd created. "The timing couldn't be better," Richard said. "They're actively using stolen, proprietary information to launch a competing business, which demonstrates both intent and execution of their conspiracy." At 10 a.m., I called an emergency staff meeting to to inform my remaining employees about Jessica's departure and the circumstances surrounding it. I prepared carefully for this conversation, wanting to provide enough information to prevent rumors and speculation without compromising the ongoing criminal investigation. I need to inform you that Jessica Walsh is no longer employed by this company, I began, addressing the concerned faces gathered around our conference table. We discovered that she had been accessing and copying confidential client information without authorization, apparently for use in a competing business venture. The reaction was immediate and intense. Shock, disbelief, anger, and betrayal flashed across faces of people who had worked closely with Jessica for months or even years. Michael Torres, my senior consultant, was the first to find his voice. Are you saying Jessica was stealing client files? That's exactly what I'm saying. We have documented evidence that she systematically copied proprietary information over an 18-month period, including client contact lists, strategic planning documents, and competitive analysis reports. Patricia, my assistant, looked pale and shaken, but she was so professional, so dedicated. She stayed late to work on presentations, came in early for client meetings. How could she be stealing from us at the same time? That's what made her so effective, I replied. Jessica used her legitimate job responsibilities as cover for industrial espionage. She appeared to be a model employee, while systematically gathering intelligence for unauthorized purposes. The questions came rapidly after that. Who else might be involved? How long had this been going on? What information had been compromised? Were their jobs secure? I answered what I could while protecting the ongoing investigation, reassuring the team that their positions were safe, while acknowledging that we would need to implement additional security measures going forward. I want everyone to understand that this situation doesn't reflect on your work or your integrity, I concluded. Jessica deceived all of us, and she did it with remarkable skill and persistence. But we caught her, we've protected our proprietary information, and we're taking appropriate legal action to ensure she faces consequences for her actions. At 11 a.m., Detective Santos called to report that arrest warrants had been executed at both Jessica's apartment and David's dental office. Both suspects were in custody, and investigators were conducting searches of their properties and computer systems for additional evidence of corporate espionage and conspiracy. Jessica's apartment contained extensive files related to your business, Detective Santos reported. Client contact lists, marketing strategies, financial projections, competitive analyses. Enough material to stock a competing consulting firm for years. What about David's office? Even more interesting. We found business plans for something called Martinez Consulting Solutions, complete with marketing materials, client targeting strategies, and fee schedules. They were planning to launch next week with Jessica as senior partner and David as managing director. Martinez Consulting Solutions. David had even stolen my naming convention, apparently believing that adding his own surname would provide sufficient differentiation to avoid trademark issues. The audacity was stunning, even for someone who had spent our marriage demonstrating his complete disregard for ethical boundaries. They're both lawyering up, Detective Santos continued. But the evidence is overwhelming. Unless they're planning to claim that Jessica accidentally copied several hundred confidential files over 18 months, we've got them cold. The rest of Monday passed in a blur of phone calls with lawyers, conversations with shaken employees, and the strange satisfaction that came from watching 18 months of betrayal and deception finally face consequences. Jessica and David had played a sophisticated game, but they'd underestimated their opponent and overestimated their own cleverness. Tuesday brought news that David's dental practice was in chaos, with patients canceling appointments and staff members questioning their employment security. The arrest of their employer for corporate espionage and conspiracy charges had created exactly the kind of professional scandal that destroyed medical practices overnight. Even if David avoided prison time, his reputation in the local medical community was permanently destroyed. Jessica, meanwhile, was facing the reality that her MBA and consulting experience might not be sufficient to find employment after being arrested for industrial espionage. The charges would follow her for the rest of her career, marking her as someone who couldn't be trusted with confidential information or proprietary business strategies. Wednesday brought a call from Marcus, who had learned about the arrests through local news coverage and was struggling to process the implications for his own relationship with his father. Mom, I can't believe this is real. Dad arrested for stealing from your company? Jessica working as some kind of corporate spy? It sounds like something from a movie. I know it's difficult to understand, I replied, choosing my words carefully. Your father made some very poor decisions, and now he's facing the consequences. But how could he do this to you? I mean, I know the divorce was painful, but this is criminal behavior. This could destroy his entire career. Your father has always been someone who takes shortcuts when he thinks he can get away with it. This time, he couldn't. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing the destruction of his idealized image of his father. What does this mean for us, for our family? It means that we move forward with our lives and let the legal system handle your father's choices. Your marriage to Sarah is beautiful and strong, and that's what matters now. Thursday brought the first settlement discussions, with David's lawyer reaching out to Richard about potential plea agreements that might avoid trial and reduce the criminal charges. Jessica's attorney was taking a different approach, claiming that she had been manipulated by David and hadn't understood the legal implications of her actions. They're trying to blame each other, Richard reported. David's lawyer says Jessica was the mastermind who seduced his client into the conspiracy. Jessica's lawyer claims David manipulated a young professional who didn't realize she was committing crimes. What's your assessment? Both explanations are probably partially true and completely irrelevant. They're both adults who made deliberate choices over an extended period. The evidence shows systematic planning and coordination that implicates both parties equally. Friday afternoon brought the news I'd been expecting since the previous Monday. Morrison Industries had canceled their contract expansion, citing concerns about working with a consulting firm that had been involved in a corporate espionage scandal. The irony was perfect. Jessica's theft of proprietary information about Morrison's account had directly led to the loss of the business relationship she'd been trying to steal. But Morrison wasn't the only client making decisions based on the week's events. 3 other companies called to schedule meetings about expanded consulting contracts. Apparently impressed by my company's handling of the security breach and attracted by the publicity we'd received as victims of corporate espionage. It's interesting, Patricia observed as she updated my calendar with new client meetings. Jessica and David thought they were going to steal your business, but instead they've generated more interest in your services than we've seen in months. She was right. The news coverage of the arrests had positioned Martinez Marketing Solutions as a successful local business that had been targeted by competitors because of our valuable client relationships and proprietary strategies. Instead of being damaged by Jessica's betrayal, we were being viewed as a company worth stealing from, which was its own form of professional validation. By the end of the week, I found myself sitting in my office on Friday evening, looking out at the parking lot where Jessica's silver Honda had once occupied its regular space. The past 7 days had transformed my understanding of justice, revenge, and the difference between the two. Jessica and David had spent 18 months planning and executing an elaborate scheme designed to destroy my business and steal everything I'd built from nothing. They'd used my son's wedding as cover for their deception, turned my trust into a weapon against me, and nearly succeeded in their carefully orchestrated betrayal. But they'd made one critical error. They'd assumed that I was the same naive woman who had failed to recognize David's affair until he was ready to confess it. They'd underestimated my intelligence, my strategic thinking, and my willingness to fight for what I'd built. The legal proceedings would continue for months, with criminal trials and civil litigation that would determine the ultimate consequences of their conspiracy. But the real victory had already been achieved. Jessica and David's carefully constructed plan had been turned against them. Their deception had been exposed, and their reputations had been destroyed by their own actions. More importantly, I discovered something about myself that I hadn't known before the wedding. I was stronger than I'd realized, more strategic than I'd given myself credit for, and absolutely capable of protecting what I'd built from people who sought to destroy it. Saturday morning found me in my garden again, pulling weeds and trimming bushes in the crisp autumn air. The physical work was therapeutic, but it was also symbolic. I was cultivating something beautiful and strong, removing elements that threatened healthy growth, preparing for whatever challenges the next season might bring. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Mom, I'm proud of how you handled everything this week. Dad made his choices, but you made yours, and yours were better." I smiled as I deleted the message. then went back to my gardening. There was work to be done, a business to grow, and a future to build. Jessica Walsh and David Martinez had given me their best shot, and I'd not only survived it but turned their own weapons against them. Some people might call what I'd done revenge. I prefer to think of it as justice, served with the patience and precision that came from understanding the difference between reacting to betrayal and responding to it strategically. The garden looked better already, healthier and more vibrant with the toxic elements removed. Just like everything else in my life. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.